Friend from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, who is a strong opponent of this treaty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonnier, and I want to congratulate you for your outstanding leadership on this effort. What I'd like to do is briefly put this discussion of NAFTA in a broader context and then say a few words about a trip that I and 5 other members of the House, the Government Operations Committee, recently took to Mexico last week. The context of what we are talking about now is the de-industrialization of the United States of America. The Associated Press had an article the other day which reported that since February of this year, we have lost 260,000 manufacturing jobs. We're now down to 17.6 million manufacturing workers, the lowest since 1965. What is going on in this country is that the General Electrics, the General Motors, the Digitals, the AT&Ts are downsizing. They are moving to Mexico. They are moving to the Pacific Rim, and by the hundreds of thousands, they're throwing our working people out on the streets, disrupting communities that were thriving, and going to countries in order to pay the workers there starvation wages. And let's be very frank about what's going on here. If this trend continues, and we continue to lose our decent-paying manufacturing jobs, the jobs that you were talking about, that pay 10, 15, 20 bucks an hour, that allow a worker a little bit of dignity. If we lose those jobs and replace them with the new type jobs, the $5 and $6 an hour jobs, which are temporary, part-time jobs, in 20 years, if we continue that trend, this country will have a third world economy. That's the overview of what's going on. And it is not an accident that every multinational corporation in America thinks NAFTA is a great idea, that they are putting millions of dollars into this campaign to convince this institution to support them. It is not an accident, because they understand that if NAFTA is passed, their profits go up. At the same time, for American working people, we descend into a third world economy.
Would the gentleman yield on that for one moment? It's not just, Mr. Sanders, the issue of jobs leaving, going to Mexico. The other issue is how large American corporations can use the threat of going to Mexico. NAFTA is the hammer over their heads to say, well, if you don't do this dollar give back in these negotiations, or if you aren't willing to give up some health care or some retirement benefits, if you don't do that, we're just going to go to Mexico. And there's enough companies that have already gone that workers take that threat very, very seriously.
You don't even have to say it. All you have to do is take this chart and hang it on the bulletin board at work. And I think the workers get the message very, very quickly.
I would add one other thing. He talked about the money that the USA NAFTA is spending. Last week I brought one of the brochures that a lobbyist had dropped off in my office that was pro-NAFTA. This is their new publication. They made it look like a coupon book with all the jobs they say it's going to make for each state. And you can cut out your own state and put it on your refrigerator or cash it in or something. I don't know, but it's multicolored, much nicer than any political brochure that any of us have had. But it's typical of the pro-NAFTA people. They're spending so much money, $30 million from the Mexican government, tens of millions from large American corporations that, as Mr. Sanders said so well, are going to benefit from NAFTA, to do this kind of garbage to convince members of Congress. And never in history has a foreign government tried to spend that kind of money to lobby elected officials in another government. And never really has there been this kind of lobbying effort from our own corporation to get us to give away the store.
Mr. Brown, the interesting question is, I think we can recognize, with all due respect to our colleagues, that the United States Congress is not one of the most courageous institutions in history. And I fear very much, and the American people will have to make this judgment as to whether the members of the House and the Senate are capable of standing up to the tremendous onslaught of corporate America. And I would say that the result is still in doubt. I'm not sure that we can. In the next month, you're going to see what tens and tens of millions of dollars are going to do. You're going to see what the corporate media is going to do. And the fundamental question will be, does this institution have the guts to understand who sent us here? Are we going to represent the ordinary working people of this country, or do we bow down to corporate America, and do they win another victory? If I might, Mr. Bonnier, I'd like to say a very few words.
We'd like to hear about your trip.
About a trip that I and 5 other members of the Government Operations Committee just took last week to Mexico. Let me be very brief in highlighting some of the vivid impressions that I recall right now from that trip. We went to Matamoros, which is below Brownsville, Texas. And there was this lovely state-of-the-art General Motors plant that manufactures and assembles car radios. It was a state-of-the-art factory. Workers there were making $1.80 an hour. And right across the street from that plant, we saw where the workers were employed, where they were living. Where they were living were in shacks without running water, without electricity. And I must tell you, and I say this deeply, I was embarrassed as an American citizen to see an American corporation like General Motors treat its people in that way, forcing them to live without running water and without electricity. And then we had another meeting, and we met with women. And I think Marcy Kaplan made the point, most of the people who are working in these factories in Mexico are women, 80% who are working in this GM factory. Why do you choose women? Well, the feeling is they are more exploitable. They're going to fight back a little bit less. In any case, we met a woman in a meeting who was working for the Zenith Corporation. She made $1 an hour. And in describing her life, she broke down. She cried, talking about what it's like to keep a family in existence on $1 an hour. And then we went to Brownsville, Texas, and we met with a Dr. Carmen Rocco, very courageous physician in that area. And she described the birth defects that are taking place in that area. And she pointed out that today we still don't know where all of the toxic waste being produced in Matamoros is going. Theoretically, what the law says is they're supposed to take their toxic waste, take it to the United States, discharge it in a nice and safe and environmentally sound way. Nobody believes they're doing it. They're discharging it in ways nobody knows where it's going, but the fear is that birth defects are rising in Brownsville, Texas. And I want to say one last point. We went to Chihuahua, Mexico, and we met there, and I myself spoke to two separate groups of about 250 farm workers. There is an illusion that it's only Americans and Canadians who are concerned about this NAFTA agreement. Not so. In Chihuahua, Mexico, we met with small farmers, and they are scared to death that as a result of Salinas' agricultural policies plus NAFTA, they're going to be forced off the land that they have farmed with dignity, with pride, that their parents and grandparents have farmed. They're going to be forced off the land. They're going to move north to the maquiladoras, and they're probably going to illegally immigrate to the United States. So the last point that I wanted to make is it is not just Americans and Canadians who have concerns. Millions of people in Mexico share that concern.
I thank my colleague. And before my colleague came here, I mentioned a recent poll that was done in Mexico on this agreement. At one point, 64% of the Mexican people supported this agreement. It is now down in the latest poll to 32% because they understand instinctively that the workers are getting a bad deal. American workers as well as Mexican workers. I would yield. I have just 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I get all my colleagues get a chance to speak. So I yield to my friend who's been waiting, Mr. Klink from Pennsylvania, if he wishes time, and then to my friend from Maryland, Ms. Bentley.
Thank you, and I just want to add my voices to those, Mr. Bonnier, who thank you for your leadership in this. You have really been a stalwart in this effort, have held us together and shown us great leadership in what I consider to be probably the most important issue that this Congress will take up. And I just wanted to mention tonight, you're talking about the cost. My governor, Casey, who of course, Robert Casey from Pennsylvania, who has been recovering from a heart transplant surgery, and the acting governor, Mark Singal, as well as our labor secretary, Tom Foley, have come out strongly opposed to NAFTA. We're one of the few states where the chief executive is in opposition. But I want to mention some of the things that our, and I take this actually from Tom Foley's comments that he made in testimony against the NAFTA. We're talking about the cost, and Mr. Sanders was absolutely correct, and others have alluded to it, where you have a cost to the workers where that threat is held over their heads. But we also have a threat to our environmental and our labor laws. And Tom Foley pointed that out, I thought, in he's saying that U.S. and Canadian firms already are arguing that they cannot compete with Mexican factories that do not meet the same standards. Thus, they will either move their operations or lobby the U.S. and Canada to harmonize or lower the standards to keep jobs here. We're talking about labor standards. We're talking about environmental standards. In the state of Pennsylvania, Tom Foley is estimating that we have already lost about 2,000 jobs just in the last couple of years. There was a Volkswagen plant near me that now make those cars down just outside of Mexico City. The Volkswagen plant was one of the prides of the state of Pennsylvania. When we attracted that factory, at one time we employed 5,000 people. It is now closed. Sony Corporation, oddly enough, has taken that